Okay, so it's this recording. Right. So as I told you before we start recording, our first questions are pretty general, not necessarily connected with Gestalt therapy and Gestalt as such.
Mm-hmm.
So please tell me, and tell others your name, where you are now, and if you like your age, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm okay with my age. They prefer not to disclose it. So I'm John Gillespie. I live in London. I'm most of the way through my Gestalt therapy training. I see some clients, and I over recent years I've worked in the voluntary and the charity sector in the UK.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, and next question is who are you as a person? So your hobbies, your passions, your interests. Yeah.
I watched one of the other interviews, so I kind of had an inkling that this question was coming. I didn't want to know any more questions, but I have a freeze response around "Who are you?" Which is obviously historic. I go to a place of, well, I don't have a clue who I am. And when I was thinking about this, I was recognizing that I tend to go to story about me, to kind of, in Gestalt terms, personality function, or to a kind of a field informed perspective. Like I guess I have my story. I'm somebody who tends to go, and I think is a bit known for being on the edges. That's kind of some of what I do, and I also recognise that who I am and how I manifest is a lot determined by the field in a way that I don't pretend to understand. Like I've noticed that in the current coronavirus situation, a lot of strange process has been triggered. A lot of process has been triggered for me. Mm-hmm. I think I'm thinking, oh, you're probably wanting something more specific in terms of, oh, I like cooking, or I like gardening. Yeah, I'm sure more colour will emerge as we.
Yeah. So like you said, if I understood it right, that you don't pretend this is the phrase I got, and it's interesting for me. So I guess sooner or later you will maybe develop it, or because the questions will lead you there.
That would be nice if I know who I am by the end of this interview.
Yeah. Okay. Well, next, one of these more general questions is, who has the most impact on who you are as a human being? Yeah.
Is it my family, my parents, by virtue of I struggled in my relationship with my parents, so their impact is more through kind of what they brought, that created the rupture in our relationship. It feels less figural now, but or less immediately present now. But I had a 5-year relationship with a Gestalt psychotherapist within the space of the last 10 years, and she had a massive impact in helping. It's hard to describe it, the impact of a relationship like that. Help me kind of hold myself better. My way of being in the world has always been awkward. I think one of my primary structures is a kind of a narcissistic one, and so I'm very familiar with doing things that are received as wrong or inappropriate, and feeling a lot of shame. And it's not just my ex-therapist. There are many. I guess where I come to is there are many people actually whom I have been given to from, and I've taken from. I have a wide and diverse circle of people who support me and love me and sometimes challenge me.
Thanks. And what about events or circumstances that have shaped you the way you are now?
My life trajectory is I was high achieving in school, and I tried to at university, but it didn't quite work, as a way of coping with what I didn't have by way of relationships at an early age. And my life kind of went completely upside down in my 20s, and I withdrew from life. And then I found therapy. I was fortunate around the time I was 30 that I got 9 months day patient treatment in a hospital for eating disorders, which I struggled with for a long time, and that led to me doing a year of quite an experiential program in integrative art therapy. That kind of opened the way to a Gestalt therapist and to Gestalt. And then I went to Esalen. I met Michael Clemens, and from that connection, I spent 18 months training in Cleveland at the Gestalt Institute there, which was vastly impactful, and I've never been so impacted and or emotionally affected by anything that's come since. But the rest you kind of know is that I then went on to train Gestalt.
Okay, so so now the questions around Gestalt, in fact. So one of it you've already addressed. So the question was, how did you come to Gestalt therapy? So you sort of started to describe. Would you like to add anything to that? How did it happen?
I had to, when I was doing my integrative art therapy course, I had to write an essay comparing TA, transactional analysis, and Gestalt therapy, and I found sort of inclinationally, TA seemed far more kind of rule bound, structured. This is how relationships are, whereas Gestalt was, oh, it's all kind of in the air, and there weren't no rules, and there was. I think because of what I've said of my own process and needing to go to the edges of relationship, that being a familiar place for me, I needed, or I benefited from what feels to me like a very kind of permission giving sort of anything goes ethos underpinning Gestalt. I think the way that I see it has evolved and changed over the years, but that was what initially drew me.
Yeah. And again, something that you already started. So the question is about what are you the most attracted by in Gestalt therapy? And maybe, as you said, this has evolved, of course. So if you could describe those moments, if you like, of course. But
sure. I'm a lot less. I struggle a lot more in my relationship with Gestalt lately. The first experiences that I had, or the earlier experiences, were incredibly heart-opening, and I felt taken in, and I felt able to take in others. And since then, and I think it goes along with doing a training. I figured sort of 7 or 8 years ago that the best way of advancing my own self-development, my own personal process, was to train as a therapist. I think that the downside of that is that maybe the nature of training, but certainly some of the institutes that I've trained at have. So let's put it this way: it's been a struggle for me to hold the other's process alongside my own. And there's a moment in training where the focus was no longer on supporting my own process. It was helping me be with another and facilitate another's process. And that, I'm not answering your question, am I? I'm telling you what I struggled with, but it's still figural, because I think what I'm working out within myself is very, on the very basic, how to be with another, and not thereby disappear. And I found it really impossible to. I don't want to come across as saying that something wrong about the way that I was trained. It's just been very hard to bring together the self and the other, and at points in my training I've missed sufficient support or sufficient permission for self. It's like, you have to do it in this way.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yeah, this is clear. I don't know in which way we have found ourselves in here, but also so we started with this, that you've been attracted by this ethos of freedom, of anything goes, as you said, and lately you started to somehow in retrospection see some other aspects of Gestalt in practice. But are you now attracted by anything in Gestalt? Could you say, or now you are rather distracted, or I don't know.
I acknowledge I'm ambivalent as to whether I include myself as a Gestaltist. But I certainly acknowledge that I've been through trainings and I've taken in a lot. I think, I mean, I guess I see Gestalt theory. First of all, I see it as something distinct from Gestalt therapy. I see it as a wider embracing theory that can be applied to therapy. I also see Gestalt theory as a map, as a prism through which to look at the world. I don't see it as pretending to any kind of truth. I see it as a theory. Let's try this out and see. And I think, and I don't think, for instance, that Gestalt philosophically solves some of the. Sorry, my partner's just on the phone. I'll shut the door. I don't see Gestalt necessarily as solving some of the kind of the philosophical problems like the Cartesian mind object split. I think, anyway, I won't I won't go into that here. To come to your question, I think I draw most from a field perspective, without really. I know there's eons of stuff written on what the field is in Gestalt. So is it phenomenological? Does it have more of a kind of objective sense of describing what's out there? And I kind of almost don't. I sort of abstain on those kind of questions. But I notice how much, for example. So let me say it this way. I notice how much I'm supported by some of the wider perspective. Like in the last week, things have really, that field theory brings. So in the last week, things have really kicked off in my work life and got really difficult. And I draw from a field perspective in being curious about the relationship to what's going on with me personally, to what's happening in the wider field, which at the moment is really informed by the coronavirus, and that's just a very straightforward example of where it allows me to bring a wider lens and bigger perspectives than I would have had available to me prior to my training.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks. And what's there next? Okay. And what about your greatest memories in Gestalt? What are they? Could you share?
I had many wonderful memories when I was training at GIC, Gestalt Institute, Cleveland. The amount of love that I experienced there just kind of opened me up like never before. And I will give you an example. Was in the past I kind of abused myself by doing multiple Gestalt trainings back to back in a way that I wouldn't do now. And I'd started a training in England, and then for a weekend, and then I did 6 days starting a new program at GIC, and then I had, I think, a 2-day break between, and then I did 4 days of the Gestalt program, the Gestalt training program that I'd been doing then for about a year. So I had kind of like 10 days of training with new people, which was difficult for me. I find it quite difficult to relax and to with new people. And then I was back again at the end of this with my Gestalt tribe, and I'd been really kind of reflecting and holding myself in, to the point that I couldn't make contact. I sat in groups on Grindr, the gay dating app, and I just had to withdraw. And a friend of mine, in a break, she kind of said to me, she said, "John, look, I'm really okay with you doing what you need to do, and I really miss you." And gosh, I can feel touched by it now, but I mean, you can see what the place was for me. And I went straight into after that, I went straight into my process group, and we were doing a check-in, and I started talking, and my body temperature dropped like 10 degrees, and my arms started, I'm doing it like that, they started shaking, and it's like this electricity was running out through my arms, and I've never had such a profound, the facilitator said it was like it was a heart opening because it goes through your arms. But I was kind of checking in, and my check-in was like, fuck, what the hell is happening to me? And like, do you feel it? Do you feel it? Look this. I miss those early experiences. There was something special about that group, and I think about the way that they taught and they supported us as a cohort.
Mm-hmm. 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 And coming from the greatest memories to the most challenging ones?
I just respecting others involved. I don't name a specific example, but I have had a number of instances where I've been met in trainings with a kind of "you're wrong," "this isn't acceptable," "you've crossed boundaries here," which have been very painful, and I'll leave it there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's okay. And well, and given the very fact that you are now, you know, struggling, and you are now asking yourself the question about who you are, what is the Gestalt therapy place in your life, but would you consider, do you feel like a part of Gestalt community, whatever this means?
I think I am, irrespective of whether I feel a part or not.
Mm-hmm.
I would wonder to what extent anybody. I think I imagine others have others have struggles. I think my own struggle is very much I've been pondering on this a little bit, and wondering about my relationship to Gestalt therapy and my relationship to the Gestalt community, and are they the same thing, or are they different? I think because of some of what I bring, which has been quite edgy, around sex, around kinky sadomasochistic sex, around gender. Some of what the organisation I set up, New Gestalt Voices, one of our projects is to create a book looking at Gestalt approaches to working with gender, sexual and relational diversity. Probably got that. GSRD. And more broadly in terms of how I find it hard sometimes to reach out and to know how to reach and contact with others in the community. So I notice I kind of retreat to this this sort of outsider place, and I imagine that will change. But that's kind of where I feel how I experience myself at the moment.
And okay, and do you consider then NGV as an outsider perspective, or as a kind of Gestalt community perspective?
I'm working through what feels like a paradox that NGV was mobilized or not NGV mobilized a lot of my narcissistic process in not wanting to be small, unseen, powerless, wanting to find a voice, wanting to put a finger up to these fuckers who criticize us as trainees and keep us in our places, and don't let us fly until we've interjected sufficient Gestalt theory, and so it came from very much a kind of me against them place. Not altogether. The paradox is that it also mobilized a lot of support. We have 1,000 plus followers on Facebook and people from all over the world. So clearly my own process tapped into something that others identify with. I'm currently kind of with others. I'm negotiating this. Can it be both personal process or what is it? What is NGV for the field? And does it have a future? Is one question. I think there's something a little bit like a child that reacts against its when you go on to have children, you raise your children in a way the complete opposite of the way that your parents raised you and hurt you. And I think there's another level of sort of kind of integrating parents in all of their fullness that is available for me in my own process before NGV can kind of give birth to something something a bit more whole. Yeah.
Yeah. yeah, so it's interesting because the last question is about the future of Gestalt, and I guess you partly again started to addressing this question, and yeah, would you see some you know that these processes of Gestalt therapy and NGV future will somehow overlap, will will be interconnected for sure, but how? Do you have any ideas, any impressions?
I think every generation kills off the one before. Every new generation needs to find its own expression within a form, its own our own community, and I kind of see around myself, or I'm included as part of, and around NGV, the emergence of other people who haven't found their star status within Gestalt yet, but have something new to say. It feels, and I think Margarita Spagnuolo writes about the generational change, generations raised by narcissists, and then our generation doesn't know how to have relationship, and I sense something of my friends and colleagues, amongst whom I definitely include you, are a bit more embracing of the rougher, dirtier edges of life, drugs, sex, abuse, and also possibly a little bit less satisfied, complacent with the Gestalt therapy model as sufficient to address the quantum, the degree of social, ecological justice, social justice, and equality kind of challenges that we are facing. I don't come to a view on that question, but I think it's important that we're asking that question. Whether Gestalt will exist in 50 or 100 years, I don't know. Don't know that that's particularly important. I think Gestalt draws on a whole series of traditions that have been around for eons, and bits of Gestalt have been harvested by other practices.
Yeah. Okay, so we are at the end almost. I'm just wondering if how you are, and what about the questions about who you are? Are you even more far away, or was it helpful for you, this interview?
I feel okay. I wasn't sure before we did it that I would be comfortable with what I have said, and I feel broadly okay. You can use this. I don't know whether the voice will come through on the video, but my boyfriend Franco is speaking away in Portuguese, and this goes to the question of who I am. It's taken me a long time in life to, and I'm touching wood or something, to find a partner, somebody kind of meet me on an intimate level, and that's been missing throughout all of my training. I somehow I interjected something that went with Gestalt training, or with Gestalt, that made it harder for me to be with the messiness of an actual relationship. And I'm noticing, I'm 45, isn't it? at a relatively middle young age, that how much of life I have avoided through, as a consequence of not being secure enough to allow another person in close, and I think a lot of what I've of the energy that I put that out there into the Gestalt field has been a what's the word when you kind of channel something, has
I don't know, canalize
has been like a deflection of where I'm not getting my needs met on a more real level, not to invalidate any of that, but just to acknowledge that I'm, that says a little more about
Thank you for your, it was inspiring, but first of all, for your generosity to, to share all that with me. I'm touched, and thank you, and and let's end now. Shall we?
Okay. Are we going to end the call, or are you going to stop recording?
Yeah, I will stop recording. Okay.